The 1970s was a bold, wild decade full of groovy fashion, daring ideas, and some truly bizarre product flops. From exploding cars to edible shampoo, not everything was a hit. Curious what went hilariously wrong? Let's rewind and uncover the strangest, most unforgettable failures the 70s left behind. The phone with a view and a price tag. Alright, let's take a little trip down memory lane, back before everyone had a video camera in their pocket. Remember Bell Telephone? Yeah, the company that eventually turned into AT&T. Well, back in the swinging 60s, they were dreaming up the future. At the 64 World's Fair, they unveiled something straight out of the Jetsons, the Model 1 picture phone. Imagine a phone where you could actually see who you were talking to. Pretty wild stuff for the time. A handful of these prototypes even saw some limited action that decade, giving folks a taste of what was to come. So, by 1970, Bell decided to take it mainstream and launched the first commercial picture phone. But here's where the dream hit a snag: the price. Get ready for this. It cost a whopping $160 a month, plus you paid by the minute. Adjusted for today's dollars, that's like shelling out over $1,200 monthly, even if you never made a call. Yikes. Plus, it was strictly a one-on-one affair, no conference calls or virtual family get-togethers. They kept trying, mind you. Rolled out a Model 2, tried pitching it to businesses in the 80s, and even released a home version, the Video Phone 2000, in '92. None of them really caught on. But here's the funny part. Just a few years back, in 2019, two old Model 2s fetched over $7,500 at auction. Finally found an audience. Just 50 years too late. Go figure. Betamax. Better but didn't share. Alright, remember the days before streaming, when you actually had to rent a movie? Back in 1975, Sony dropped Betamax on us, and boy, it seemed like they'd hit a home run. This was groundbreaking, one of the first ways to record TV or watch movies at home. And let me tell you, the quality was noticeably better than anything we'd seen. Sharper picture, richer sound. In fact, it was so good that professionals, like TV stations, stuck with high-end beta tapes well into the 2000s. But here's the kicker, where Sony kind of shot themselves in the foot. They had this superior technology, but they kept it locked down tight. Sony flat out refused to let other companies make players or use the Betamax format. That meant fewer machines on the shelves and, critically, fewer movies available for you to rent or buy. Then, just 1 year later, JVC waltzes in with VHS. Maybe the quality wasn't quite as stunning, but JVC had a different game plan. They shared. They licensed VHS technology to anyone who wanted it. The result? VHS exploded. Suddenly, you had more player options, more brands, and way more movie titles available. Poor Betamax went from owning the entire market in '75 to just a tiny 10% sliver by '88. It proved that sometimes, being technically the best doesn't win the race if you aren't willing to play ball with everyone else. Gerber's grown-up goof. You know Gerber, the company that's practically synonymous with feeding babies? Well, back in 1974, they decided to aim a little higher, trying to capture the adult market. They launched this product called Gerber Singles. The idea? Pure convenience for young, single folks living alone who maybe didn't want the hassle of cooking after work. Sounds reasonable enough, right? Little pre-packaged meals, ready to heat and eat. But here's where things went sideways. These singles were essentially adult-sized servings of, well, baby food. Yep, the same pureed meats and mushy vegetables, served up in those iconic little glass jars. Can you imagine? Coming home, kicking off your shoes, and unscrewing a jar of beef puree for one? Or maybe some luscious blended peas. Yeah, it didn't exactly scream sophisticated adult dinner. People were confused, maybe a little grossed out. The texture was all wrong, the whole concept felt a bit odd, and let's be honest, a frozen TV dinner suddenly looked pretty good. Adults wanted actual texture, flavor, and maybe just a touch more dignity with their meals. Singles vanished from stores almost overnight. Big idea, bigger flop. Downy Flake toaster eggs. Remember that big push for anything you can stick in a toaster back in the early 70s? Following the craze for Pop-Tarts and frozen waffles, Downy Flake, the frozen breakfast folks, thought they had the next big thing. In 1972, they gave us toaster eggs. The concept was simple enough. A frozen, pre-cooked egg patty you could supposedly brown up right in your trusty toaster. Fast, hot breakfast, minimal fuss. Seemed logical, tapping into that demand for quick morning meals. The problem? Well, they looked less like something you'd eat and more like something you'd skip across a pond. People described them as thick, round, unappetizingly dense hockey pucks. Definitely not screaming delicious breakfast. Beyond the visual turnoff, the texture and taste just didn't deliver what people expected from an egg. Let's be honest, the whole idea of a toasted egg was already a bit weird for most folks who like theirs fried, scrambled, or boiled. Consumers basically gave them a collective, no thanks. Introduced with fanfare in '72, these breakfast oddities were yanked from freezer cases by 1975, proving that convenience alone doesn't make a meal. It still has to actually taste good and, well, look like food. Sansui Quadraphonic sound. Think back to the early 1970s audio scene. Most of us felt pretty advanced with our standard two-speaker stereo setups, right? Well, the folks over at Sansui thought we could do better. They envisioned sound hitting you from absolutely all angles, total immersion. So, in 1972, they dropped their Quadraphonic sound system on the world. This wasn't just stereo. It was 4 distinct channels pumping audio from the front, back, left, and right. A whole different ballgame. Now, it wasn't exactly cheap. The system ran about $200 back then, which is like splashing out around $1,200 today. But it was undeniably cool, cutting-edge stuff. Other audio companies quickly jumped on the bandwagon, offering their own quad setups. Some even featured funky joysticks so you could actually steer the sound balance around your room. Big rock acts got into it too. Aerosmith, Clapton, the Eagles. They all released albums specially mixed for 4 channels. Here's the rub, though. Despite the hype and the rockstar approval, the average Joe just wasn't convinced they needed to overhaul their entire system and find space for 2 extra speakers. It felt like a big leap, maybe too complicated. Adoption never really took off, and the whole Quadraphonic thing quietly faded out by '78, making way for digital sound. Still, you can find working Sansui quad receivers today for maybe $200, a neat piece of audio history. Polaroid's flickering film dream. Back in the '70s, Polaroid absolutely owned instant photography, didn't they? Those cameras were everywhere, magically printing photos right before your eyes. Feeling unstoppable, they decided to tackle the next frontier, home movies. In 1977, they launched Polavision, their big shot at dethroning Kodak's popular Super 8 film format, which pretty much dominated everyone's family movie nights back then. The Polavision system was definitely thinking outside the box. It used these unique film cartridges that looked a bit like tiny cassettes. After filming your masterpiece, you'd slot it into a special desktop viewer, and amazingly, it would develop the movie in just a few minutes. Instant gratification, movie style. They even cleverly designed the reel so you could play it on a regular Super 8 projector if you wanted. Sounds innovative, but the reality didn't quite match the hype. The biggest problem? The picture just wasn't very good. You needed incredibly bright light, otherwise everything looked muddy and dim. Colors lacked punch. And perhaps the fatal flaw? Absolutely no sound recording capability. That was huge, especially when Super 8 cameras could capture those precious family moments with audio. People just weren't buying it, literally. Sales fizzled, and Polaroid pulled the plug just 2 years later, in 1979. It's now a footnote, easily found dirt cheap online. A reminder that even giants can stumble when they misread what people really want. Okay, be honest, did any of you actually use, or at least see, one of these 1970s product duds back in the day? Clairol yogurt shampoo. Remember when natural became the big buzzword? Everything suddenly had honey, herbs, or lemons splashed across the label. The beauty aisle started looking like a health food store. Well, Clairol decided to get in on this trend, but they took a slightly dairy approach. In 1979, they unveiled Clairol yogurt shampoo. The big idea? Yogurt is good for you, so naturally, it must be great on your hair too. Okay, maybe a bit of a stretch. They really played up the food angle on the bottle. It practically screamed breakfast, not beauty product. This marketing choice backfired spectacularly. People were genuinely scratching their heads. Is this for my hair, or should I mix it with granola? The lines got so blurred, you won't believe this, but there were actual reports of folks trying to eat the stuff. Let's just say marketing a hair product like a snack food didn't quite hit the mark. Add in that the shampoo's performance wasn't exactly mind-blowing, and this yogurt dream soured fast. It disappeared quickly, becoming a funny little remember when story in beauty product history. Remember LaserDisc? Big, shiny, and almost there. Before we all had stacks of DVDs, remember those enormous silver discs? That was LaserDisc, hitting the scene back in 1978. They looked like supersized CDs, and honestly, they offered a glimpse into the future. The picture quality? Definitely sharper than your average blurry VHS tape. The sound? A noticeable step up. For movie buffs, it felt pretty cutting edge for home viewing. But it wasn't quite ready for prime time for most folks. The big sticking point? You absolutely couldn't record anything on them. That was a deal breaker when taping shows off the air was half the fun of owning a VCR. Laserdiscs were strictly playback devices. Plus, the players and the discs themselves cost significantly more than the VHS gear everyone else was buying. So, while Laserdisc hung around for quite a while, becoming a favorite for serious film enthusiasts who loved the quality and early bonus features like commentary tracks, it never really took over the mainstream living room. Once the smaller, cheaper, and eventually recordable DVD format arrived, the writing was on the wall for the big, shiny discs. A cool idea, just not quite the right package for the times. When the World Football League tackled the NFL and fumbled, think back to 1974. While the NFL reigned supreme, a brash newcomer burst onto the scene, the World Football League. The WFL had huge aspirations, talking about international teams and directly challenging the established football giant. They kicked off with 13 teams across America, including one clear out in Honolulu, maybe stretching the definition of world just a bit, as they never left U.S. soil. They even managed to tempt some notable NFL players over with the promise of fat contracts, a real gamble for those guys, leaving the stability of the NFL. But the initial buzz and flashy start quickly sputtered out. Stadiums often looked sparse, the league's finances went into a nosedive, and crucially, paychecks became unreliable, even for those lured star players. Can you imagine? It turned into a financial nightmare behind the scenes. After barely limping through its inaugural 1974 season, the league simply couldn't sustain the losses. It collapsed spectacularly midway through the 1975 season, proving that taking on the NFL required way more than just ambition and a hopeful name. Gone almost as fast as it arrived. That crazy swerving bike. Okay, the mid-70s gave us some truly wild rides, remember? Let's talk about the swing bike, which rolled onto the scene around 1975. This definitely wasn't your dependable 10-speed. Invented by a guy named Ralph Belden, its unique claim to fame was having two separate steering points. You had the usual handlebars up front, naturally, but there was also a second pivot point right under the seat that let you steer the back wheel independently. Imagine that. You could literally make the front and back ends wiggle in completely different directions. This bike was pure spectacle, built strictly for showing off, pulling off crazy S-turns down the block, or maybe riding awkwardly with one wheel on the sidewalk and the other in the street. A real head-turner, but zero practicality for actually getting anywhere. The big catch? Riding it smoothly took serious coordination. That independent rear steering made it incredibly wobbly and unpredictable for anyone just learning. Let's just say it probably led to plenty of sudden, unscheduled meetings with the pavement. So while it looked radical, the sheer difficulty and high wipeout factor meant it never became a neighborhood staple. It pretty much swiveled off into obscurity by 1978. Appreciate you watching so far. Ready for more? Let us know by commenting yes below, helps us see who's still along for the ride. Sauna Hot Pants. Alright, let's talk about some truly bizarre 70s inventions, because there were plenty. You remember hot pants being everywhere, right? Well, someone decided to combine that trend with the endless quest for easy weight loss. Introducing Sauna Hot Pants. The concept was wild. Inflatable, puffy shorts you'd wear around the house. The promise? Pure magic. Just put them on, kick back on your lazy boy, maybe even grab some snacks, and supposedly, the trapped heat would make you sweat off inches from your hips, thighs, and belly. No diet, no exercise required. Just sit there and shrink. It sounded amazing, didn't it? The theory was that intense sweating in those problem areas would just melt the fat away. Several companies even jumped on this bandwagon, pumping out their own versions of these inflatable miracle workers. Of course, the reality was less miraculous. People quickly discovered that sweating profusely doesn't actually equal fat loss, just water loss. And lounging around in what amounted to blow-up plastic shorts was incredibly uncomfortable and, frankly, looked ridiculous. Plus, for the gentleman wearing them, there might have been a little anxiety about exactly what might be shrinking due to all that trapped heat. These sauna shorts deflated from the market pretty quickly, becoming a hilarious example in the long line of too-good-to-be-true weight loss gadgets. Twist and tone. Twist away the inches? Not quite. The 70s, an era practically overflowing with questionable fitness trends. One real gem, if you can call it that, was the twist and tone. Remember those plastic discs? This little gadget promised a revolution. Get a slimmer waistline and maybe even lose weight, all without the unpleasantness of actual, strenuous exercise. Forget jogging or sweating it out. The sales pitch was pure, blissful convenience. You simply stood on this spinning plastic circle seriously. It looked just like a big lazy Susan countertop tray, planted your feet firmly, and twisted your upper body side to side. Easy peasy. You could supposedly do it anywhere while watching your favorite shows, maybe even during commercial breaks. The ads pitched it as a miracle cure for anyone who dreaded breaking a sweat. But let's be real, it was mostly wishful thinking. While you were moving, it wasn't exactly a calorie-torching workout. It certainly couldn't replace getting your heart rate up or building real strength. Plus, let's face it, standing there swiveling your hips felt pretty darn goofy after a while. These twisters had variations floating around since the 60s, but none ever truly became a fitness staple for a very good reason. Smell-o-vision revivals. When movies tried to smell. Here's a real head-scratcher from the annals of movie history, smell-o-vision. The original nutty idea popped up back in the 60s, but the 70s saw some earnest attempts to actually make it happen. The dream? To go beyond just seeing and hearing a movie, they wanted you to smell it too. Imagine watching a scene in a bakery and actually smelling fresh bread, or getting a whiff of salty air during a seaside sequence. Totally immersive, right? Well, the reality was a bit stinkier. The technology was incredibly primitive and unreliable. Sometimes the scent would puff out way too early, sometimes way too late, and sometimes not at all. Even worse was the lingering effect. Once a smell was released, say, exhaust fumes during a car chase, it tended to hang around. So you might be trying to focus on a tender romantic moment while the theater still reeked of gasoline, and maybe that chili dog from 3 scenes back. It was more distracting and confusing than captivating. Audiences weren't impressed, and theater owners definitely weren't eager to install expensive, glitchy scent machines. So, the 70s revival of smell-o-vision faded fast, proving that maybe some senses are best left out of the multiplex. 8-track tape cleaning kits. Keeping those 8 tracks ticking? Okay, picture this. It's the 1970s, and you've got your favorite 8-track jammed into the player. Maybe in that sweet muscle car, or your living room console. Those big old tapes were the sound of the era. But with all that clicking and clunking, companies smelled an opportunity. Enter the 8-track tape cleaning kit. Remember those? Little boxes filled with tiny brushes, maybe a questionable sponge, and some kind of miracle spray solution. They promised to keep your tapes sounding crisp and prevent them from getting eaten by the notoriously finicky players. A noble goal. The only trouble? These kits were often more trouble than they were worth. The truth was, the brushes could be too abrasive, the chemical sprays might leave weird gunk behind, and sometimes you'd just end up damaging the delicate tape surface instead of helping it. Instead of extending life, they could actually shorten it. It didn't take long for folks to catch on that these weren't miracle cures. People mostly gave up on them, and soon enough, those smaller, more reliable cassette tapes started arriving, pushing 8 tracks and their dubious cleaning kits right out the door. Bricklin SV-1. Remember the Bricklin SV-1? Maybe? Launched with serious fanfare in 1974, the SV-1, that stood for Safety Vehicle 1, was supposed to be the future of safe and sporty driving. It definitely looked the part, didn't it? With those dramatic gull-wing doors, it screamed futuristic cool right there in the mid-70s. The brainchild of Malcolm Bricklin, the idea was noble: build a car focused on crash protection, featuring an integrated roll cage and bumpers designed to absorb impacts. But, like many ambitious dreams of the era, reality hit hard. Despite packing a V8 engine, the car was incredibly heavy due to all that safety reinforcement, making it disappointingly slow. Build quality was a constant headache. The acrylic body panels tended to crack, and those signature gull-wing doors? Well, they weren't always reliable, sometimes trapping occupants inside. Production nightmares and soaring costs plagued the Canadian factory, and after producing fewer than 3,000 cars, the company went belly up in late 1975. A bold vision for safety, ultimately undone by practical failures. Qube, TV's early interactive gamble. Alright, let's take a little trip back to 1977. Remember when watching TV was just watching? Well, Warner Cable had this ambitious, maybe even audacious, idea called Qube. Forget just passively flipping channels. They envisioned a future where you interacted with your television. Picture this. Using a special keypad, you could actually vote in real-time polls during a show, maybe influence how a story developed, or even pick the next music video they played. Sounds a lot like what we do online now, right? But this was way back then, a genuine crystal ball glimpse into interactive entertainment. Of course, being so far ahead of the curve had its downsides. The technology, while impressive for the era, was expensive to install in homes and, let's be honest, pretty darn clunky. It wasn't always reliable, and many families found it overly complicated when they just wanted to unwind after dinner. Qube rolled out in a few test markets, and while it definitely turned some heads, it never really caught fire with the mainstream audience. People just weren't sure they needed it. By the early 80s, the dream fizzled out. Maintaining the complex system cost too much, and without widespread adoption, Qube quietly faded away. Still, you've got to tip your hat to them. It was a bold swing, one of the very first attempts to make TV a two-way street, even if it ultimately proved to be an idea whose time just hadn't quite come yet. Do you think any of these failed products were ahead of their time? Why or why not? The Pet Rock. Let's talk about one of the absolute head-scratchers from the good old days, specifically 1975. Remember the Pet Rock? Yeah, you heard me right. Not some fancy toy, just a smooth, unassuming stone plopped into a cardboard box. This wasn't just any box, mind you. It had little air holes punched in it, like for a real critter, and came with this hilarious care and training manual. The whole gag was that it was the perfect pet. No feeding, no walks, zero mess. And believe it or not, for a hot minute there, America went absolutely nuts for it. The brain behind this bizarre brilliance was an advertising executive named Gary Dahl. Legend has it he was tired of hearing friends complain about their pets, and voila, He turned a virtually worthless rock into a $4 sensation. It was pure marketing genius tapping into that desire for something simple, something funny. Millions flew off the shelves, mostly as gag gifts or conversation starters. It was just so delightfully absurd. But, like flared pants sometimes do, the novelty wore thin pretty darn quick. By early '76, the joke got old. People looked at their pet rock sitting there and thought, okay, it's a rock. The craze evaporated almost overnight, leaving stores scrambling to get rid of leftover inventory. While Gary Doll laughed all the way to the bank, the pet rock cemented its place in history as the ultimate symbol of a flash-in-the-pan fad, a perfect, quirky snapshot of 1970s culture that was here today and truly gone tomorrow. Clackers, that loud toy that bit back. Remember those things called clackers? Oh man, every kid on the block seemed to have a set for a while there. Just two hard, heavy acrylic balls hanging on a string, right? The whole point was to get them swinging, up and down, clack, 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 making that satisfyingly loud noise as they slammed together above and below your knuckles. They were flashy, strangely addictive, and tougher to master than they looked, which only added to the challenge. But here's the kicker. Those seemingly simple balls weren't exactly indestructible. If you really got him going, or maybe caught him at a weird angle, bam, they could shatter like cheap glass, sending razor-sharp bits of plastic absolutely flying. Suddenly, the playground fun wasn't so fun anymore. We started hearing about cuts, chipped teeth, and some pretty scary eye injuries. This little fad quickly turned into a genuine safety hazard. It wasn't long before Uncle Sam stepped in, around the mid-70s, and flat-out banned them. Parents breathed a collective sigh of relief, and just like that, the noisy clacker craze went silent. Wearable TV? The story of the TV hat. In the 70s, someone had this wild idea. What if you could watch TV anywhere, totally hands-free? Enter the TV hat. Yep, it was exactly what it sounds like, a baseball cap rigged with a tiny television screen dangling right down in front of your eyes. The promise was portable entertainment, maybe watching your favorite sitcom while strolling through the park or riding the bus. Sounds futuristic, maybe? Well, the reality was less than stellar. First off, let's be honest, wearing this thing made you look pretty comical, like an extra from a B-movie sci-fi flick. And actually watching it? Imagine squinting into a minuscule, grainy screen just inches from your nose. It was a fast track to eye strain and a headache, not exactly relaxing entertainment. Plus, the picture quality was nothing like we have today, fuzzy and hard to see unless the lighting was just right. Then you had the clunky wires snaking down to a battery pack or tuner you had to carry. It was awkward, uncomfortable, and just didn't deliver. Unsurprisingly, the TV hat never caught on and vanished pretty quickly. It remains a funny little footnote, a bizarre gadget that tried to leap into the future but tripped at the starting line. The rolling fishbowl, remembering the AMC Pacer. Okay, flashback to 1975. Remember when the AMC Pacer rolled onto the scene? You couldn't miss it. That car looked like absolutely nothing else out there. It was all huge, rounded glass and this super wide, almost bubble-shaped body. AMC was going for something revolutionary. A small car that felt surprisingly spacious inside, like a compact with big car room. Folks quickly nicknamed it the Fishbowl on wheels, and honestly, it fit. But that unique design brought its own set of headaches. For a supposedly compact car, the Pacer was surprisingly heavy. That meant it felt kind of sluggish on the road, and, worse, it wasn't exactly a gas sipper. Terrible timing during the 70s fuel crunch. And that look? You either thought it was cool and futuristic, or just plain odd. There wasn't much middle ground. Sure, it was roomy inside, and it definitely earned some dedicated fans over the years, especially after popping up in Wayne's World. But the cool factor and cult status couldn't overcome the sluggish performance and polarizing style for most buyers. Sales fizzled, and by 1980, the Pacer was history. It remains a fascinating, quirky attempt at innovation, a bold swing that just didn't quite connect. The Ford Pinto's fiery secret. Launched back in '71, Right when gas prices were making everyone sweat, the Pinto seemed like a smart buy. It was compact, didn't cost an arm and a leg, and barely sipped gasoline. Just what America needed during that oil crisis, right? Well, behind that sensible image lurked a genuinely terrifying problem. Ford placed the gas tank in a really bad spot at the very rear, almost asking for trouble. Get tapped from behind, even in a relatively minor collision, and that tank had a nasty habit of rupturing and potentially erupting in flames. The truly shocking part? Ford was apparently aware of this horrifying risk. Internal documents later surfaced showing they'd actually crunched the numbers. The cold calculation? Paying off lawsuits for injuries and even fatalities would likely cost less than spending the extra bucks per car to fix the dangerous design. Once that bombshell dropped, the public backlash was understandably massive. The Pinto quickly became infamous, a textbook example of corporate negligence putting dollars way ahead of driver safety. It was a huge PR nightmare for Ford and remains one of the most notorious automotive blunders of the decade. Most of these 70s flops are long gone tossed out, forgotten, or collecting dust in someone's attic. But who knows? That oddball item might just be worth something today. Did we miss any memorable failures? Drop them in the comments, and as always, thanks for watching and taking this nostalgic trip back with us.